this is Gareth Johnson. Gareth is an established international speaker, leader and motivator in the field of education leadership. And when he was allowed to, he has given talks around the world, including the world famous Asia Pacific International Schools Conference in Hong Kong. He currently leads a very well established and indeed growing educational leadership development programme for heads of departments in independent schools. And prior to this, he was deputy head at Asheville College in Harrogate, head of maths at Millfield School, and a teacher at Manchester Grammar, where I believe he won Teacher of the Year. So that's enough from me about Gareth. I'll now hand over to Gareth, who is going to talk to us about leadership. Thank you.
Alicia, thank you so much. Wow, that was a bit of a flattering introduction, but thank you anyway. It's a pleasure to be here, folks, and to be kicking off this Headship Beyond Education series. It really is. We obviously haven't got much time, which is actually a good thing because I think it keeps it relatively focused and to the point. So the positive news before I've even started today is that I'm not going to be sharing lots and lots of slides and doing death by PowerPoint, but I do want to share something with you so that you've got something definite to take away. So if you bear with me a moment, I'll just share my screen now, and I hope you can all see that. So I'm going to start off by answering some very direct questions. The first one is, why on earth am I here? Well, you had a little snapshot there from Alicia, but in a nutshell, I just love doing this. I love engaging with folk. I'm passionate for leadership development, which is the idea of developing leaders in a professional development context. I think motivational leadership just is one small part of that. I've been lucky enough to work with literally hundreds of heads of department, members of SLT, collaborating from different schools since 2010, when I started doing this as an academic deputy in the northeast of England. My own background, as you heard, is in academic leadership. And I think the only thing I wanted to add to that is that I got to a point in my career where everyone said, you've got to go on and become a head now. And the more people said that to me, the more I decided to resist it and do something different, because my head and my heart were both telling me that actually I didn't want to follow that route, and something like this was something that I would enjoy and love doing much more. So here I am. And I think if I rewind right back to where I started as a head of department, I went into that role as a young buck. I was 28 years old, loved the school and loved the role, but I realized that within a couple of days, weeks of getting there, that I really didn't have a clue what I was doing, and there was nothing out there to help or guide me. So I always vowed to myself at that time that at some point in the future I would give something back, and that's where I am now. In terms of the how do I hope to make this session a little bit worthwhile for you? Well, the people we've got online today, you know, I've looked at the list. It's an incredibly diverse audience. I'm not going to stand or sit here for 30 or 40 minutes and lecture you about leadership and motivational leadership in particular. But what I am going to do is share with you my journey, if you like, over the past 6 months when times have been really tough in terms of engaging with those folk around the country. And so therefore, what I can do is I can give you, if you like, the collaborative view on motivational leadership from all these folk who are at different stages in their leadership career. And I think also as part of that, there'll be just a little sprinkling of looking ahead to the future in terms of professional learning and leadership development, because I do genuinely believe, as is the case in our schools, that the future landscape is very, very different. The what. So what exactly will I give you to take away? Well, as I said to you, we are a diverse crowd here, and I'm sure you're asking WIFM, I think the acronym is, which is what is in it for me. Well, I just hope that there's something here, you know, in the next 25, 30 minutes, which you can latch onto and which is pertinent to your role and to your context. As I've said, I'm going to keep it relatively short. I'm hopeful that there'll be a little bit of time at the end for Alicia to host a Q&A or just some comments around the room, because we're quite a small group, so that will be absolutely fine. But I'll be available offline after this series of sessions if people want to get in touch and discuss anything which I've said. It's absolutely no problem, and it'll be a pleasure. Okay, just a word before I move on to the next slide as well. There's a visual on the right here. It's something which I actually stole off LinkedIn at the weekend rather. But the reason I'm going to share it with you is because it's absolutely relevant to something which I'm doing right now, and with heads of department and leaders up and down the country in terms of leadership development, and all connected to motivational leadership. So if you get bored of what I'm saying, you could perhaps have a little look at that whilst I'm talking, because we'll be coming back to it in a few slides' time. Themes then, in terms of what I'm going to try and get through. I've already tried to answer the questions why, how, what. This might be familiar to some of you. It's actually a well-known leadership mindset by Simon Sinek. I'm a huge fan of Simon. He's someone who tends to look at most things and then turn them upside down and approach inside out, which I absolutely love. This idea of challenging the norm, and certainly in our world, that's welcome. So in a nutshell, the easy order of questioning, of course, is what, then how, and then why. So start with the what, because it's an easy question to answer. But actually, the best way to approach any level of questioning is to start with the why, and then work through the how, and then the what. So I'm going to attempt just to keep that as a common theme throughout. And in fact, I love thinking of this as inspiration versus manipulation. Inspiration meaning why, how, what, and manipulation meaning what, how, why, in terms of bringing people with us and bringing them with us because they want to come with us. I'm going to do a little bit on a 2% mindset. It's just a lovely, lovely visual, which I've shared with many folk over the years, from kids in kindergartens right the way through to school leaders and governors. And there's something in that for everyone. So I thought that would be quite nice for me to share and just see what your thoughts are on that. I've already said I'm going to take a little look at the last 6 months, a very honest look at that last 6 months, but not just talk about the what. I want to be able to talk about the why and the how as well. So a little bit of a different slant, if you like. I'm going to talk very, very briefly about risk management, not to do anything detailed. We haven't got time, of course, but just to say that in my world now, the idea of being able to challenge the norm and do things a little bit differently is a rather exciting place to be when we generally live in our educational world, which I think is quite risk averse. And the last point from me is this rather strange phrase here, but let me just explain what I mean by it. Everything that I try and achieve with the leaders I engage with is about asking them to step up right now and be leaders. So that's through this leadership development, and not stand and lecture about what they need to do in the future to become average leaders. And again, I'll just say more about that, but it's an interesting way of approaching leadership development, and I hope you can take something away from that. So here we go. This is the 2% mindset that I was referring to just in that previous slide there. I'll give you 20 seconds or so to take this in. It's a lovely visual, as I said a few moments ago. It's a very simple visual. There's nothing complicated about it at all. And what I wanted to do just with you folks today was to share a few interpretations of this slide, and then perhaps just pause for a moment for you to think about what single attribute might actually be most relevant for you. I take no credit for it, of course. It's not something that I've developed. This was developed by a guy called Dr. Andy Cope. But the reason I use it virtually all the time is because I just love it, and it really does resonate with everything that I believe in, and there's something for everyone here. So his interpretation, and this is not based on scientific fact or research, so the 2% is arbitrary, is that 2% of our population occupy this outer circle here and basically do all the exciting stuff, whereas 98% of the population occupy the inner circle there. Now, when I've thrown this out to audiences in the past and said, well, what do you think of that? There's the usual discussion about the percentages and whether they're actually accurate or anywhere even approaching accurate. But I've had some very interesting interpretations, and one which challenges this substantially, I think, is that it's not about 2% of the population. It's actually about us all, but perhaps 2% of our time, and that 98% of our time is spent within this inner circle. And that's something that I can certainly resonate in previous roles as school leadership. Another interpretation which fascinated me was very simply that this inner circle here is management, and the outer circle there is leadership. Very simple. And you might also think, okay, well, there's lots of stuff here, but it all looks a little bit hollow. You know, is confidence really to do with a leadership mindset, a 2% mindset, choosing happiness? And the answer is, well, yes, they could be interpreted as quite hollow attributes at times, but it works. It works, and it works especially in tough times. A lot of folk I work with come back to this visual if the going gets tough. And here's a real life example of what I'm talking about. So the stuff I'm doing at the moment with some heads of department and aspiring senior leaders in the North has a session next week, which is based on leadership mindset. But obviously I'm going to talk about this a little bit as well. I'm going to hit them with a load of exciting stuff, but then I'm going to put them straight into a really tough collaborative problem solving exercise, really tough. And of course, that's designed then to destroy this entire positive nature, and you might say the 2% mindset, because you just forget all about it and go back into crisis mode. Whereas it's my job to be able to say to them, well, actually, you know, yes, you've got to solve this very, very difficult problem. You're in charge of the school for the day and you're making all the decisions, but can you do it while still keeping a focus on something, not everything, but something here from the 2% mindset? So it may be, for example, that it's this attribute here, this idea that you're acting in spite of fear. That would still be part of a 2% mindset. Have you rehearsed the difficult conversations you're about to have with your senior leaders or with your heads of department? So it's a great visual to refer back to. And I just wanted to share that with you because, as I say, it's something which resonates with me. On to the next slide then. So this is just a reflection on the last 6 months, if you like, and referring back to that 2% mindset and the attributes there, which perhaps resonate most strongly with me during lockdown. So that dreaded date, which I believe March the 23rd, 2020, when we locked down, it threw my entire world into chaos, because I'm so used in terms of leadership development to be engaging with people live, developing them as leaders, sitting alongside them, holding hands, sharing a brew. People, relationships, trust, understanding, it only could ever really happen in person, in my belief. So I really didn't know what to do because we had some programs to finish off locally and nationally, and I could see that other people were folding in terms of professional development. Nothing was happening, so we had to get on with something quite quickly. And I realised as well, speaking to folk who I'd been working with, that actually there was a hunger then for leadership development, as much as there is now, if not more so then, because of course we were really venturing into the unknown. So we got into this platform. We've used Zoom throughout the entire lockdown, and we will continue to use it for leadership development because we've developed it, we've tweaked it, we've refined it, we've kept thinking radically about how it can work best. And actually, we've got a formula that works now. And again, I'm happy to share that with you because this is what this is all about. We found that doing stuff with big groups like this is almost impossible for leadership development. You can talk to hundreds, if not thousands of people, but to actually develop people as leaders is almost impossible in these settings. So we started to work on the breakout room functionality of Zoom, which is absolutely fantastic. I was using people who were on the programs as leaders for those breakout rooms. Each breakout with a very, very definite discussion and with slides to annotate and then bring back to the main room for feedback. We found that we could do same themes, we could do slightly different themes, we could do completely different themes, differentiated levels in different breakouts. But the best bit was that actually getting folk back to the big room afterwards and giving feedback and takeaways. We were finding that, you know, if you have, say, 24 folk online and then do 4 breakouts, then potentially you're getting through 4 times the volume of progress in 60 minutes that you might otherwise do with one big group. So it's been fabulous, and it's been a formula we've developed away from school. So this idea that it doesn't interfere with the school day, and it could be twilight. It has been in a couple of occasions, but actually what's been much better has been to engage with folk at around about 8 o'clock at night and do a very short, sharp 1 hour. And they're really focused. There are no implications with travel or accommodation or any distractions. The odd child, but that's about it. But it works. It's a formula that works, and it's something I'm trying desperately hard to embrace as part of what we might call a hybrid for the future, because you know, as many of us have in our schools, we've taken this time to take a step back and just stop and reflect on how, you know, things might look for the future, but how it might actually look even better if we embrace this rather than resist it. I said that I was going to talk just very briefly about the risk management in a risk-averse world. Well, really, what I wanted to say here was just that it's absolutely fine to try something new and to challenge what we do in what we might call our conventional educational world. I was so used to in my previous life, certainly, to being asked, you know, are you really confident in doing things differently? Because this is how we've always done things, and this is how it has to be done. And, you know, in my world now, I'm finding that it's much more refreshing to be able to challenge this sort of approach and say, no, we're going to try something slightly different. I'm going to try and bring people with me as well, and bring them with me because they want to be with me. And I'll say more about that shortly. But it's refreshing to be able to do that. And I do feel, as I said a few slides ago, that we tend to live in a rather risk-averse environment. So it's nice to be able to do things a little bit differently. I was going to share with you a separate slide in a moment. It's all relating to this statement here, this idea of effort versus impact. One of the sessions we did last term in lockdown, it was a session that I'll never forget. It was with a big international school in India called Missouri International School, an absolutely beautiful school set at the foot of the Himalayas. I was lucky enough to be out there last Christmas, just before we went into lockdown internationally. I was doing a conference and then got the chance to visit some schools out there, and this was one of them. And we managed to engage in some leadership development training with colleagues there. But in India, the scale is completely different to what it is here in the UK. So we might be engaging with 20 or 30 folk, or even 10 folk, whereas in India it can be, you know, multiples of hundreds. So it's a very, very different model. But we were talking about risk management and also strategy with this particular school, and they were all over the place, because what they were doing is they were running around like headless chickens, trying to firefight all the time. And I think we've all been there, and some of us continue to be there, understandably. So I just wanted to share this visual with you, because it's something that I did, again, in relation to everything I'm talking about today. But this had a big impact on the leaders at this particular school. And I don't know if you can see in the background there, but that is actually Missouri International School, and the Himalayas are floating around there. It's an absolutely stunning setting, and continue to do some work out there. But the point about this is they were preparing for what they believed was the new normal. Little did they know what was around the corner again. But the point is that all their efforts were in this bottom right hand corner of this matrix. So this idea of a high effort rather, and a low impact. So wasting an inordinate amount of time and having very little impact. And of course, when we got into this, and this is risk, it's strategy, it can be anything really, but in particular relation to those two, we found that where we wanted to be was up here, and either over here or over here. So basically, in the top two boxes there. And very quickly there, it was more straightforward to turn this around into a discussion which was more focused on where high impact could be achieved rather than low impact with lots and lots of effort. So I just thought I'd share that with you. It's a nice little visual, and as I say, it's all related to what we're talking about. Interestingly, that same school, I was referring previously to the kind of formula that can work. The head made contact with me and asked me to run a session for all her staff. She had nearly 100 teachers on site, and she wanted this sort of platform with 10 breakouts and 10 different leadership themes, with her staff ranging from teaching assistants right the way through to her and the school owner, the chair of governors. And I managed to achieve that with 10 of my HODs from around the UK who stepped up and led magnificently. And it was a crazy off the scale session, but it was just, you know, testament to the fact that really anything is possible in this world. I just wanted to spend 2 or 3 minutes focusing on this lovely visual, which I shared with you on the first slide. The reason I said I'm sharing with you is because this is what I'm doing right now. I've just launched a load of stuff in the north of England, which is for the aspiring heads of departments and also for the aspiring senior leaders. And the question I put to them in the first session, which was last week, was what are the qualities of an excellent leader? Simple as that. The session was why, how, what of excellent leadership. So the usual order of questioning. But interestingly, that irrespective of level of leadership, all folks were coming back to this kind of stuff, the idea that the relationships are the center of everything. And also, I think particularly pertinent there is the fact that these guys are aspiring leaders. So certainly a significant number of those, when just probed a little bit more firmly on what would be their priorities, for example, in the first year, would be to make a lot of sweeping change without consulting and actually getting folk on board, and getting folk on board because they want to be on board. So that's when this came in. And in fact, it was such a strong common theme between those levels and indeed other levels as well, but those two in particular. This idea, you know, trust and understanding has to come, or at least stand alongside strength. So I hope you like that visual. And again, I take no credit for it. As I said, it came off LinkedIn. But when you see something and you think, "Wow, that's exactly what we've just been doing," it's brilliant to be able to see it in that form. So I said that I talk a little bit about this slightly strange phrase of step up, don't be told why, how, what to step up, just a little bit about the formula and share some common thoughts from folk I'm working with now and have worked with in the past. And this may be something you're familiar with, but I'm absolutely gobsmacked, if you like, that there are so many people out there who still do not believe that they're good enough to do the job as a leader. And when we dig deep and get into it and actually, you know, ask the question, you find that folk are saying, we think everyone else is better. They're better informed, they're better prepared, they're just better suited to the role. And you know, how untrue is that? But it's a real common theme, and I'm uncovering it again at the start of this academic year with a lot of the potentials, the aspiring senior leaders and heads of department. So part of the job is obviously to give these people a lot of self-belief that they can step up and lead now. You know, I'm talking about leading sessions and leading breakouts and stepping up to the plate now and making sure that they're getting the praise and the recognition that they deserve for doing it. It takes an inordinate amount of time. I mean, I find that most of my time these days is spent behind the scenes, actually working with folk offline, getting them ready to step up, you know, sometimes holding hands as well through the session. But it's worth every single moment, because that's what this is all about, this idea that they should step up right now and, you know, not wait another year to step up in a less impressive way, if you like. The most important bits, I think I've probably mentioned what I've said there in terms of the actual behind the scenes work and the support for these people as they step up. But what I found is perhaps most critical is that they get the actual recognition, credit, not just publicly in terms of the forums that we're working on, but actually back at school with their senior leaders, with their heads, so that they know just how good some of their staff have been. And then finding that time, which I think we could all say is a barrier, but finding that time to be able to sit down and just go through what's happened, either as a coach or a mentor, but to be able to reflect and give some really positive and critical feedback if necessary. I think I'm just keeping my eye on the watch there. It's coming up to around about 11 o'clock, which was what I'd actually aimed for. So I'll just go to the next slide, which is really, Alicia, if you want to come back online, to open it up to everyone. If they want to ask me anything or pass any comments about anything that I've said over the last 30 minutes, because I'd be more than happy, especially in this size of group, to discuss that or perhaps listen to some thoughts. Alicia, before I just stop sharing, I've got one more slide that's just got my contact details on, but I think from what we were saying just before we went live, Alicia, the information is all being shared retrospectively, isn't it? Including the video and the contact details. So everything's there, and I'm sure that'll be made available as and when. But as I said right at the start, and probably say again before the end, if you do want to connect offline, I'll be more than happy to do so, to talk through anything which I've discussed. So Alicia, I'll stop sharing and then it's back to you.
Okay, lovely. Thank you, Gareth. Well, I hope everybody found that useful. If anybody's got any questions they'd like to ask, please feel free to either unmute yourself and ask them directly, or to pop them in the chat and I can ask them. And one of the questions I've got for you, Gareth, I mean, it's clear that developing people takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. Have you got any advice regarding time management in terms of, the time needed for developing leaders?
Yeah, I mean, it's a common one, this, isn't it? It's an issue in leadership that we have to invest an awful lot of time to get anything done. But I've often found, and I know it's made slightly more ruthless online because of the way it works, with starting and finishing, but having a definite time scale which says that, we've got 30 minutes to get through this, and we'll start at 4 and we'll finish at 4:30, actually keeps it relatively efficient and focused. We've talked a lot about this in the opening sessions last week about, qualities of excellent leadership. And actually it featured then that a lot of folk who are just stepping up into the role respect perhaps and have the trust in the leaders they work with who start and finish on time. So having that definite time protected and set aside, but with a definite start and end point, I think is absolutely key and keeps it focused. And also just makes people feel that they're going to get something worthwhile out of it, and not just walk away after 30 minutes not entirely sure what the outcome is, for example. So that's just my own view. I'm sure it's there to be challenged, as everything is, but I find that works generally pretty well.
Great. And then another question, which I think is one that we all have, is how, and it's very hard to answer quickly, but how do you define and explain to people the difference between leadership and management? Because quite often in schools you'll have people who are very good managers, but they are not leaders. They are managing people exactly as you described in that slide, in the 98%. And I sometimes think in schools there's that problem that if you've got a middle leader who's a manager, how do you get those people who are underneath to learn to lead? Yeah,
I mean, it's about stepping away from the day-to-day, isn't it? And I suppose that's where these programs come in. There's a real opportunity to do that because they're kind of forced into it rather than, being forced to talk about the day-to-day management in their school. So I would say that having the opportunity to step away and forget about the 98% is really, really key. I think that visual is great because it just reminds you about some of those attributes as well. But what I've also found, which is a really powerful tool in this, is to step away from your own school context and start to collaborate with folk from other schools who are in the same positions and who have the same aspirations, because then you're kind of swept up in amongst it. And I think also, Alicia, this idea that I think as has developed organically over the years, that it's not just about talking about the difference between leadership and management, because a lot of people can do that. It's about actively doing it and, you know, promoting that through these sorts of programs where you're getting folk to step up and actually do it on the spot rather than, you know, sit and listen, which is obviously, it's that 98% of being in the comfort zone and sitting back and taking it all in. So getting people to step up is a really important part of that.
Okay, that's really interesting, Gareth. I mean, another question I've sort of got is, obviously the course that you run, and from everything you've said, is very practical. People are actually having to run through case studies, and for our audience here, who may not be familiar with your program, or, you know, might be thinking, if they were to, can you give us just an example of the kind of case study that you might work through, and sort of why you've chosen it and what skills you think it brings out, whether it's critical thinking or, you know, collaboration?
Yeah. I mean, there's all sorts of things I could share, but I think in terms of key takeaways, what I'm after is knowing that every session has a purpose and actually gets people thinking as leaders and not as managers. So it is extremely practical, as you said, Alicia. So I try to make things absolutely relevant to the school context, but to make it relevant to the school context right now. So there's an example I threw into the middle of the presentation there, which is one I'm running next week. So it's to hit a load of folk with that sexy stuff, if you like, you know, the 2% mindset stuff, but then put them into a very difficult capability scenario in the breakout rooms, which is taken from a real life school context, and say that they have to sort that out. They have to engage with it and establish what their priorities are, why their priorities, and how exactly they're going to, you know, run with it. So it's designed to stretch them in terms of thinking about leadership, but then designed to put it into real school context. Because what I've seen, certainly throughout my life, you know, engaging in these sorts of things and attending plenty in previous roles, is that you can go away and you can learn all the best things and tricks and tools to use, but then you come back to your school and it hits you like a brick wall when you're faced with the, you know, the real challenges of both leadership and management. So it's trying to put it into a practical context, but doing it there and then, and not waiting for later. And I think also, Alicia, just to add a little bit of that, you know, we do it continually through the year, so it's more of a continuum. It's a program. It's not something that's a one-off, and I think that's also critical to colleagues' leadership development, because anything that's a one-off is often then forgotten about days later, and, you know, one just resorts to the norm. Whereas this is ongoing. You know, the timings this year, obviously we've had to revisit everything. It's what I was saying about, you know, thinking a little bit laterally and pushing those new buttons, if you like. But we'd normally do 4 days a year and take colleagues out of school for 4 days. It's not feasible this year. And, you know, I've asked the question of folk and said, how are we going to run this year? You know, how is this actually going to work for maximum benefit based on what we did last term? And every day, so those days, if you like, as I refer to there, every day is 3 evening sessions spread every 2 weeks. So it's just an hour and a half if they want it. So there's a little bit of a wash up, but that continuity and the fact that it's running in the evenings away from school, it just seems to be working. It seems to hit the nail on the head. And obviously it is not too draining in terms of school resources, because there is no implication during the school day. And fingers crossed at that time of night, you know, you're asking me about engaging as a leader again, Alicia, it's a really good time to just switch into something completely separate from what's happened during the day. So seems to be working.
Great. And one of the things you talked about, Gareth, was the idea that it's good to have different colleagues from different schools, because obviously it gives different perspectives. Would you say it's good to be mixing in governors, maybe support staff such as your bursars, with your heads of departments? Do you think there's a benefit from that, or do you feel that actually those different groups need to sort of be kept separate?
Yeah. Well, I mean, leadership is leadership, isn't it, really? But obviously there are very subtle differences, and we all know that, teaching, non-teaching, different levels of leadership. But we've had instances in the past, Alicia, where we've had folk from all sorts of different backgrounds actually come along, even if it's just been for a one-off. But you know, when I started out, it was focused primarily senior school academic leadership, so 11 to 18, which I thought was quite a narrow focus. And over the years, that's just grown and developed so that we have pastoral leaders in there. We have some senior leaders, as you mentioned. I've had heads dipping in, and we've had prep school colleagues in as well. You know, heads, deputies, subject leaders, and also some non-teaching staff. They don't form the majority, but they come along. So there's a real opportunity, actually, probably to do even more there, which is more specific. But there's something in it for everyone. And obviously, you know, in terms of the differentiation there with the different rooms, when we were live, of course, we just run lots of different sessions in different parts of the school, but it's entirely possible here as well to, you know, mix folk up. I've found on a couple of programs we've run where it's advertised for experienced heads of department that can incorporate those who actually need a little bit of a kick, those who just want to be the best version of themselves, if you like, and those who are aspiring senior leaders. So there's a diverse mix, even within just one very specific program, and we have to be able to cater for it. But yes, in answer to your question, there's something for everyone.
Great. And then this is a question that's come in. I think it's quite a tough question. That's why I'm pointing out that it's not from me. We've got people saying that what you're saying is really reflecting on them, and they're trying to support and grow senior leadership teams. And we've got somebody saying that they're very interested in the work of Mary Myatt, and they wondered who inspires you, because obviously there's a lot of people out there talking about this subject. So yeah, who inspires you?
I think I mentioned him, actually. It's Simon Sinek. He's the one who inspired me. I have many role models. Most of them are heads I've worked for, you know, in previous schools and current schools. And other colleagues, you know, in a very practical sense, if you like. But Simon is someone who got me thinking very much laterally about problem solving, and to put it into a real context as well. I mean, I'm talking today about, you know, leadership developments and the idea of motivational leadership. But in my previous job, before I started doing this, I was tasked, as you know, Alicia, leading a brand new school in Hong Kong. Which was a real battle, because not only did it face a torrid time at the back end of 2019, but then COVID struck at the start of 2020 and went into lockdown. And I was faced with the task of leading the team through that incredibly difficult time. And that was 3 to 6 months ahead of where we are in the UK. And it was one of his motivational speeches which actually got me thinking critically about how I could deal with that crisis management, which was the idea, you know, in a very simple way, that everyone takes a hit and that everyone is in it together. And the idea is to retain the workforce and retain the team. And it was a very simple message, but sometimes listening to someone speak like that, it resonates. It's like so many of those visuals, and it enables you to have that light bulb moment to be able to then put it into your own context. So I hope that's answered the question in some way. I could mention many more people, but he will be the person at the moment who stands out for me.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Well, I think we don't seem to have any more questions, and I believe that Keely has joined the session. So on that basis, I think all it remains for me to say is thank you, Gareth. I think that's probably given everybody a lot of food for thought. I think particularly at the moment in the current times, to sort of pause, reflect and think about leadership is incredibly difficult when you've got, you know, schools full of goodness knows what being run like army operations. So I think it's brilliant that we've been able to hear from you, and I hope that everybody has taken something away, and if they're not able to implement it in the short term at the moment, it's certainly food for thought going forward. So thank you, Gareth.